Had enough of the been there, done that ideas? Tired of too much talk and so little action? Rewind now and welcome to Transformation and Change Radio with Dr. Kathy Obear, where the vision of true equity, inclusion, courage, and purpose meet powerfully. Dr. Kathy delivers with dynamic, engaging conversation and the most authentically brave dialogue on air today. This hit show will challenge you to explore current issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion and deepen your capacity to choose courage to speak up to greater inclusion in everything you do. Fasten your seatbelts and accelerate your effectiveness to become a powerful change agent in your life, community, job, and society. Imagine true equity and inclusion and get the tools to really manifest your vision. No frills, no fluff, just really powerful, good stuff. Transformation and Change Radio starts now.
Welcome to Center for Transformation Change Radio. I could not be more excited to welcome back to the show the Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington, Washington Consulting Group. Hello, dear one.
Hello. So glad to be here.
Oh, so glad to be here. End of 2021. Couldn't think of any better way to end without you and reflecting back. What, if anything, have we collectively, individually learned since the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others? The resurgence of some re-demand for racial reckoning and final racial justice a year and a half ago, and where are we now? And so thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Grateful to be here and to just kind of take a deep breath together as we close out 2021, right? And that feels particularly important right now as we honor the life and the legacy of Bell Hooks, and invite her energy and spirit of love and light into the room, who now joins us in the ancestral space, and shoulders that we stand on, and has made a difference for so many of us who are in the work and will continue the legacy.
Yeah. I'm talking a legacy, over 35 plus years. You've been working in higher ed, church organizations, consulting and training, full-time now, 20 plus years, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to remember when we first started working together, and I think it was the early to mid 80s at some of those national conference, American College Personnel Association, ACPA. And then we've been consulting and training together on and off over 30 years, because I remember early 91.
Yes.
And I'm just so grateful for you as a friend, colleague, mentor, leader, your patience and grace to help me learn and grow over these decades, because I would not be the person I am today without you in my life. And we co-created the Social Justice Training Institute. We started talking probably mid 90s, but 97 for sure, 98. We did our first one with Vernon Wall and Mark Collin. And I know that experience of SJTI, where we're still active and in leadership, has shaped so much of who I am in this world that I am helping to co-create. So from the deepest part of my heart, my friend, love you dearly.
Absolutely. Yeah, that goes back double. I'm just reminded of, how quickly 30 years can go, right? It feels like a blink and it's a flash, and here we are, some 30 some odd plus years later, kind of in the work together. So I'm just feeling really grateful for our time, our learning, our journey. And what is, more and more clear to me every day is we're not going to finish it. Right? We're not going to get it all done. And hopefully, and I do trust and believe and feel like this work has mattered, and that want to believe that we had some small part in helping to move the needle. But I'm very convinced, even now more than ever, that the work will continue. And what I see as a part of my commitment over this next 4 to 5 before I slow way down, drop it into lower gear. I'm not saying I'm going to stop or being a contribution, but have no intention of continuing at the pace and the level. I see part of my responsibility is to help prepare the handoff, to really pass the baton and get ready to pass the baton, and to do that in a way that's honoring of not only the work and the legacy and the journey and the things we've learned, but also the brilliance of those who are coming behind us, who will pick up and, move to the next level, just as we have stood on the shoulders of so many who helped us to be in this space.
I'm taking a deep breath, remembering all those who I've learned with, you know, a lot of them, and a lot of much younger people than I am who are my teachers today, which is flipping on its head. I don't know about you as a Black man, but when I grew up as a white woman, I was taught, if you just go along and get along, work hard, don't push back, your time will come when you get to be the leader. And, I don't know, 20, whatever, that all flipped. And it may never have been true. It just might have been more whiteness and white supremacy culture propaganda to keep white women particularly in line. But what a different world we live in, where people are leaders from many different places, ages, positions. Why don't we use that to transition into, I had a lot more hope a year and a half ago. I had a lot more hope when folks were in the streets, when most every organization, my guess is similar to you, that called me, asked me to work, they sounded different. There were more white people particularly showing up. And a year and a half after the murder of George Floyd, I'm feeling a very different energy in higher ed, possibly nonprofit. But can you just talk about what's the last year and a half been like for you from your perspective? What have you been realizing and learning? Anything you're doing differently? And that'll just kick us off, and then we'll see where we go.
Yeah. So as you name kind of this journey we've been on, that, in a couple of months will mark 2 years of, in this health pandemic, right? And then, almost a year and a half again in the resurgence and the reminder of racism, systemic racism, and white supremacy that got manifested in the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, and so many others, right, in that space and time. But the world got to watch the 9 minutes, right, that again, sparked something. And again, as you name in particularly, so we know that there have been white abolitionists. We know that white people have always been in it. It's never just been us as BIPOC folk. And that last year took that to another level, particularly in our time, right? In our lifetime. And so I too, like you, found myself within organizations, with leadership groups, with boards, trustees, and with all white organizations, not being called to action by members in their group, because there weren't no members in their group, right? But by their own, kind of looking at the landscape and their own hearts and passions to do something. And I think that that part of white culture, part of dominant culture, is to do something, right? That's the answer to. And again, I agree, something needs to be done. But sometimes we move to the doing something before we understand what and why we need to and how that's connected. And so we've not done the work around what's our real motivation. And you do such a beautiful job when we're together in different spaces saying, what's your motivation for social justice? What's your motivation for anti-racism? What's under that for you? What's going to keep you in it when it gets hard? Right?
Because it does.
Because it's gonna get hard, right? And it's gonna take long, and you're not gonna feel like it, and it ain't gonna go like you thought it was supposed to go this nice, easy path. And so this asking of what people's motivation is, is important. And I don't think that moving to action too quickly often creates the space for us to be grounded in why we are doing this and why this matters. And then the recognition that caring about doesn't mean I have capacity to, right?
It's another t-shirt. That's good.
Hey, so, you know, so the learning how to create this thing, and sometimes I don't even know, I've not even had the capacity to envision what it might look like. But if I have had, if I do have some idea of, you know, a more anti-racist campus would look like this, and we would look at that, if I do that, how to get from what it would look like to what it looks like now is a whole different thing, right? And my experience, and I appreciate your feeling like I'm not feeling as hopeful, is people are learning or getting more exposure to what it's going to take, right, to get to that, right? And I don't think that folks are without the clear motivation, what's in it for me, why this matters, why they're not invested, they're not willing to invest what it's going to take, the sitting in the room, going through the difficult conversation with the people who don't get it, or the people who don't agree, or the folks who think they get it more and have no patience for those who don't get it, and building the capacity to create containers and be with people in their process so that we can see ourselves on the other side. So that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing lots of wanting to do, lots of passion. I'm seeing lots of disappointed BIPOC folk and other minoritized folk, because it seemed like y'all was going to do something. Y'all invested, y'all called, and here we are right back at the same place. And not a whole lot is happening. So I see some disappointment. And in all honesty, I do see some conversations that have at least gotten started. Now that might be where they're stalling out. And I think that's something that some of the stuff that's happening right now is the stalling out and the spinning, right? Lots of assessment, lots of gathering data, lots of what to gather data, focus groups, cultural audits, lots of that. And I was actually on a call just today where folks want, now that you've gathered the data, now tell us how to do this. No. Our part was to get you the information. So now you, within your content, now we'll help you, right? You know, kind of think through that. But we cannot design your strategy for you, right? So we need to do something, and we want you, just tell us what to do. That's the classic thing. Just tell us what to do. So we can say, they told us to do that.
And blame you.
Blame you when it doesn't, you know, kind of go easy or smooth. Yeah, that might be, in fact, what you need to do, but having the capacity to do it is a whole nother level of work. And so again, the language, building capacity to do the work, I think, again, for many folks, lands jargony because they don't know what building capacity means. What does building capacity to do this work mean? And I think that what I've gotten clear about, even in the last couple of months, is like, how do I think about capacity, right? And again, it's for me the bandwidth, the skills, the tools to hold, to navigate, to be with, to experiment, and different than competence. There's something about, because we talk about you need to have the competence to do this, and this. And there's something both head and heart about capacity that comes up for me. That's more than just the skills. So there's some will in that. Yeah, and some other things. Anyway, it's coming up.
Resolve, resilience,
Yes,
persistence coming up in me. But as I'm hearing you, James, I'm remembering it took me decades to shift from I'm right, I know better, oh good, you want to work with me, all right, I'm in charge, do what I want, to truly listening deeply, hearing your wisdom, following your leadership, and partnering. And I don't know how to teach that to white folks. I mean, in the process, I can claim it and name it, talk about it, but shifting from that deficit model, whites are superior, I'm better. I don't think it takes the decades it took me, and I'm still not done because I can still run into those racist, white supremacist thoughts in a blink. But to truly humility and recognizing the brilliance, wisdom, decades of wisdom, knowledge, capacity that most white leaders don't have compared to the folk of color in their organizations, even if they're 30 years younger. And that's a huge ask for people in their 50s, 60s who are white leaders, needs to be, but to have those shifts. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about what helps. Maybe it's all leaders, but particularly white leaders, to shift, to be learners with, follow the wisdom, leadership of particularly younger BIPOC colleagues, clients, students.
Yeah, and so you kind of what comes up for me is, again, it goes back to motivation. You know, I got to this whole notion that my motive. I really want this, right? So the question that sometimes has gotten asked to Robin DiAngelo, do you think white people really care, you know, about the experience of it? And she says, well, it doesn't appear so, in terms of what it takes us to really get invested in it, right? And so, you know, I think in terms of what it takes to teach, the part of it is it's a willing learner, right? So I'm working with several seminaries right now. And one of the seminaries that I'm working with, one of the faculty members talks about kind of racism as America's original sin, right? And that being anti-racist and dismantling racism is a part of our Christian responsibility, right? Right.
Good.
And talks about it in the way that he talks about through a 12-step analysis, the 12-step, right? So, you know, kind of I'm powerless to, you know, do this without myself. I've got to, you know, do all of those 12 steps. Is very powerful in terms of recovery, right? That's what we're needing to do. And that he teaches a class that walks students through that, using the 12-step framework to dismantle anti-racism, right? So again, you know, it's humbling, you know, it's humbling. It's recognizing power. It's owning that I am, right? And so another religious leadership group that I was working with talks about the vice president was saying in his body, they're saying you must confess before you can address.
That's good.
Right? So you've got to admit your problem, that you have this stuff in you, that you should, you know, in the ways that you have modeled down through the years, right? And gotten clearer about, I still had an attitude of arrogance. I still had an attitude that I was right. I still had, and it took me a minute to confess that, right? And to confess that beyond just with my mouth, right? It's like acknowledging fully that that's my attitude, my spirit, my feeling, you know, right? And so that I can begin to address that, right? And that at my core, that is not who and where I want to be, right? And so, you know, you can't fix what you won't face. So you got to face it first, right? So that you can get there. So when I think about how we teach that there's some, again, it's a slow walk, right? So it is an investment, right? And so we get to do some of that in an SJTI when we've got 5 days, right? And 2.5 of those or so are in race groups where we really just working this stuff to at least create the moment, right, of a confession, if you will, right, right, to create the moment, and then the work, right, to continue from that space. But I think, and again, and what we get to do as BIPOC folks in that space is to find our own, not only our own internalized oppression, but our own complicit, internalized whiteness, and how we have been partners in helping to maintain this, often out of survival, right? From a conscious place, but because we just drank the Kool-Aid, said white was more right, and that's how what we've seen is success. How we navigated success. So again, working with another group where the because of the dynamic, the person of color saying, "Oh, we are right here."
Yeah, that's who we white people hire.
Exactly, right. And then as a white person who is actually actively trying to live anti-racism, who recognizes that as a dynamic, but don't have the skills to then speak to that dynamic or to navigate that as a dynamic in the room, right? But then feel stuck because everybody turns to that person. See, and you're making, but the token, but the mob, the one we got in the room, because you can't possibly know more than they know, right? So it's a very real, complex, nuanced dynamic, because this systemic racism is set up for us, is positioned this way.
It is, and I have no idea, but what comes up as I hear you is having that group talk about, well, what is our vision of an anti-racist, racially just, and then that's when the data might also be useful, not only for the white leaders, but to support the internal, probably younger change agents who are seeing what's possible, white and of color. But that's a dynamic, I bet, in higher ed is very common, possibly corporations for sure, maybe nonprofits. And you're an elder, and I apologize, I didn't say this earlier, the Unity Fellowship Church movement, and you're the pastor of the Unity Fellowship Church of Baltimore. And my wonder is how much churches across racialized identities there still might be. I got something. We got just a couple minutes left. What do you want to say about that?
So I didn't get all of the questions, so we might need to get it when we come back, but you were just starting. So we got a few minutes. Just say the question. Just
like church leadership, white and a color, might be also maintaining the status quo within religious organizations.
Sure. So let's tackle that when we come back together. I think that the role, again, just like I said, we're working with some of these seminaries and religious institutions, the idea of what's spirituality and religion got to do with it, and what's our responsibility as white religious / spiritual leaders to help to navigate and to manage this. I got an ask to speak to something about a space and experience coming together for anti-racism stuff. And is this experience going to invite all of us into the room, or is it going to be blaming and shaming?
It's an indicator of where the organization is.
Exactly. And this is and so what my response is, is this a real question? And are you asking so that I can help you to be able to talk to people about being in the space, and not being so afraid to come in it because they think that's what's going to happen? Or are you critiquing the naming of the space, right? Are you saying, because you got something in your head that an anti-racist space is going to be one that's going to beat up, right? White people. And if that's what's going on, then not a whole lot of conversation will matter, right? If you're wanting to just justify your position for not showing up or not encouraging your people to go, that's one thing. But if you're really trying to see, is this going to be a space where we can all be in the room, then we get to talk about that. And we get to talk about that in a way that doesn't say, where certainly I don't need to say, we all gonna be comfortable, right? But it does get to say, it's going to be a space where we're all invited into the room. And it's not about blaming and shaming. It's about owning and understanding our part and what we've inherited and so on. And what your part, how your part looks differently than mine.
And as a group, when folk of color are clear, direct, and name in truth, white folks, you attacked me, you're blaming shaming, and it's just versions of white fragility, as I just all too know, but I'm seeing it more. In the last moment before break, could you just let people know how they can find you if they want to see how you can work with them, speak with the organization?
Absolutely. WashingtonConsultingGroup.net. And you can just go there and you can reach out to us and we will get back with you. We generally respond to those asks during regular seasons within 24 to 48 hours. After tomorrow, we will not be responding to those requests until 2022. And that's the second week of that year. So we are taking care as we continue to do the work. Yeah.
And we may come back to that. This is Center for Transformation Change Radio, the Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington. What, if anything, have we learned since the murder of George Floyd and so many others? We'll see you in a few moments. So excited to be back with the Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington of Washington Consulting Group and Unity Fellowship Church of Balmer. I slipped into my Maryland.
You did. I saw it. I saw it. A Balmer.
I was born Memorial Hospital,
That's
Balmer. We left off talking about your work with folks in religion. Religious church, theology, whatever that T word is.
Seminaries.
There it is. It's an S word. And you reminded me, I just finished up some work, 9 months maybe, with the senior leaders and the staff of a large Catholic organization. And it really took many deep sessions to get honest, authentic, and then to really publicly claim and own the racist white supremacist history of Catholicism that was still influencing, and how that might be playing out today in their policies, practices, norms, engagement, how they recruit, on board. So that's what you reminded me of. So
I often will talk about the only place slower to move than higher education is the church. Because we got this whole narrative that has us, at our cores be good people, right? And I'm not saying that we're not, but good people can't be racist, which is a problem, right? So we get into this notion of good and badness, and it slows us up. It stalls us out and has us spin, right? And so again, the notion of working with religious leaders, and I speak specifically from the space of Christianity, and not saying that there isn't this similar dynamic in other faith traditions, but I speak to the space that I know, and I know the Christian space, and the notion of good and evil, right and wrong, black and white, it's a part of Christian hegemony. And so that part of our tension is the either or thinking that's embedded in our theology and the ways that we make meaning in the world. So it's a struggle, right? Because if this, then therefore that can't be, or that must be, and so on. And so working with why I enjoy not only teaching as a part of seminary training and being in the classroom in that way, but also working with seminary leaders is because the role of the church is so important in informing, again, how people think and see and make meaning. And there is a power of the pulpit. It's a very powerful space. And while not the space for everyone, it is a space that informs things even outside of the church. So people you don't have to attend church to be impacted by church, or definitely to be impacted by Christianity in this country, right? And the ideologies and the messages around that. And so it's just a very, very critical space for us to engage this notion of white supremacy, because white supremacy is a product of Christian supremacy, right? Which is all kinds of messy, right? And if folks, it's like, what came first? Christian supremacy. Christian hegemony came before white supremacy. And, really understanding the role, and I'm not saying Christians made white people supreme, but I'm saying that those things are linked. The ideologies, the mindsets, the good, bad, the right and the wrong, the obey your master, the ways that got understood is very much impacted, through the lens of religion. That was a hard place for me to get to. That was a very hard place for me to get to, because even as I began my work, and we know Bobby Harris' work around the cycle of suppression and socialization. And so as I did that whole cycle, and I went through born, early socialization, where we got socialized, family, and then institute, and we talk about government, media, education, and religion. I skip religion. Because we talk about the cycle of oppression, and all those other places had a role in oppression, but not religion, right? So you can't mess with my church. Now, don't be talking about my church. And when I began to really have to look at how religion contributed to the cycle, that was a harder space. Because, and again, I know that particularly as we talk about the intersection of race, and for minoritized folks, and particularly Black and brown folks and Asian folks as well, and Native and Indigenous, our religious spaces have often been our sanctuaries, and the spaces that we've gone to navigate, to heal from the bombs that we've gotten to navigate white supremacy and systemic racism that we navigate every day, right? And so we hadn't considered the role that those also played in the construction.
So looking at the history of colonization, imperialism driven by church, whether it's Catholic or Christian, and then to own how some of the theology even today is what I'm hearing may still be grounded in whiteness, superior, folk of color, less than, and how that's a huge, especially as folks of color, to look at in religion. And it's huge for whites to, how do you find the beauty of spirituality, religion, while also owning the past and the current dynamics of racism, classism, sexism, misogyny, we could keep going, heterosexism. And folks that are listening, as you said, that may not be active participants in any kind of Christian, how might this be similar in other? And folks that are more spiritual or agnostic atheist recognize that most I wasn't going to say this, I don't know if I believe it, but most organizations in the US are probably replicating the same kind of oppressive dynamics that came out of
Absolutely.
since with George Floyd being murdered, I realized I didn't have enough understanding of the history of how white supremacy was created to explain economic exploitation and justify and racist attitudes and deficit model. Whites are here, folk of color here to justify greed, racist practices. So you're adding another piece for me around how the church and many religious were part of that. So
absolutely. And again, and I feel like I want to say, I don't want this to be heard as a blaming of Christians, right? It is to be heard as a recognition of the system of Christian hegemony and Christian dominance, right? Like it's not a blaming of individual white people, right? And just like we're not throwing out white people, we're not throwing out Christians. But again, that's a part of the confessing to addressing, right? We must begin to honestly look at the role that these structures and systems and ideologies have played in maintaining status quo.
And maybe similarly, see what you think of this, the folks that have a strong religious way of being and are working to dismantle racism systemically, calling out the white folk and folk of color who are perpetuating white supremacy and racism from the pulpit in the name of a higher power, hand in hand with political folk.
Yeah. Well, and it again, it's our responsibility if we are operating from a love ethic, right, to not see something and not say something, right? We building the skills and the capacity again to be in that space and to be able to hold this, and this can be true, right? Not this or this, right? And that's a part of the tension.
So folks listening, especially in this moment in time, whether it's a religious organization, nonprofit, corporate, higher ed, maybe feeling how I'm feeling, which is the leaders have been backing off. As you said, folk of color disappointed. I've heard anger, frustration. I'm out of here. Maybe there's some place that's at least a little better. So if leaders are not going to lead, what can folks 2, 3, 4 levels down, what are they doing? What can they be doing? Cross-race coalition building, but how do you still keep anti-racism, dismantling racism, moving along when leaders are now maybe focused on something else?
Right. So what one of the other pieces I got in this last year and a half is leaders will abdicate their responsibility to lead in order not to look incompetent.
T-shirt. That's really good.
Right. So they know they need to, but they don't know how. Yeah. So they will abdicate their responsibility to lead so that they don't look incompetent. So they, put it off on somebody else. They assign it to the provost. They assign it to a committee. They assign it somewhere down the line so that they don't have to look like they don't know what they're doing. Again, there is a need for the humility that you name to be able to get the support, the coaching, the teaching, and again, there's something in this notion of systemic racism that has, if I don't know how to do this, I'm a racist, right? I'm a bad person, right? And I can't, I don't want to, kind of admit that. Kind of shifting that narrative is all another part of it, right? And it's hard to shift that narrative in the context where there's so much pain and folks are, expressing that pain in ways that don't, create the space where you feel like I can just say, oh no, right? That's right. Because justifiably, it's like, how you get to that position and not know, right? Right. So there again is some understanding of, from here and from here, that's how systemic racism has worked, right? And so, yes, I have every right to expect my leadership to have that, but I know because of systemic racism, you likely don't, right? Again, the both and, right? And so, because I know that systemically, you haven't had to have that capacity, you haven't had to know how to lead in that. I need you to be able to own that you don't know how, or that you don't have the capacity. I need you to show up with some humility and listen to us when we tell you stuff, right? And I've got more space for that, but you're disappearing and you're putting off and you're abdicating your responsibility. That just puts me in this place that's doing more harm, re-traumatizing, me feeling like, again, this is more performative and I'm doing more psychic, emotional labor to, kind of manage this. So I think that, kind of what can we do from this place, right? In terms of building our own capacity to, help to move the needle, is we've got to hold the whole thing. That's our skill set too. We have to get in spaces where we can know, one, this is not about us. Like, we didn't create this. We are not the problem, right? So we have to be in community. We can't have ourselves alone out there in this, trying to do it. Collaboration, coalition building, all of that, again, feels like more work. Yep. And in order to do it, we've got to be in community with others and build relationship with others, like the relationship that we had, where we can be in it in the tension so that we can get to the other side of it. You've got to know that there are, and again, Bell talks about it, there's grace and love. Mm-hmm. There just is no substitution for it. And I recognize that some folks like, not my part, not doing no grace and love part, right? And again, that's a part of the dynamic. You got to hold that everybody not going to be there, and everybody not going to do that. And as change agents, you have to be able to navigate with that as a truth, right? Because somebody going to have to show up with some grace and some love and some forgiveness and some understanding and some accountability and all of that in order to continue to move the work, or else everybody just ends up dead in the street. Right. I'm fine. I actually am quite fine with the folks who see their purpose and their calling is to stir it up. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to continue to have it be in your face that this is not acceptable. That's mine, right? I'm not in the space to make those people wrong at all, right?
We wouldn't be here without centuries of folk willing to put themselves out there.
Exactly. And as we seek to change institutions and transform cultures, there's going to need to be the both and in that. I think that from the place of, so we don't have the leaders showing up in the leadership way that we need them to do, right? What we do get to, and we talked about this as we were preparing for the potential virtual SJTI experience, we talked about the circle of concern and the circle of control and influence, right? So here's a concern: is the leadership doesn't know, and all of the infrastructure ain't in place. Here's the circle of control and influence, right? So these are the spaces at which I can do something, and what that something looks like is different, depending upon where you are. It's like, I got this department, and I know that I can help to unpack. I work with this group of students, and I know that I get to recommend this, and I get to do that, or whatever. And I also know that I have the ear of this person, right? So I don't have the ear of this one. That ain't listening to it, but I got the ear of this one, who has the ear of this one. And then it can say something in this room, right? So as I talk about the leading up, and the being a model and the showing and so on and so forth. So it's not, I don't live in hopelessness. I live in, I recognize that there are days that feel harder than others. But as I look at us, I look at the work that we've done, I look at people all across the globe, right? That get up every day and are helping folks to see and to name things, that the work is not in vain, right? So I think, Kath, for me, and we know that in the diverse community foundations that we share at SJTI, is this one of the key things is acknowledge, celebrate, and appreciate progress. And so when I'm working from the place of influence and control, I can see that, right? When I'm only working from the place of concern, right, then I can't see what happened this year that did not happen last year. What we got to do this year, the conversation we got to have, the people who were invited, the length of time we stayed in the room, you know, in that discussion, the fact that this did, you know, occur. I don't see it if I only stay in this place. And so I'm not saying just be here, right? Because both of these matter, right? But to simply live here does not honor the labor of folks who get up every day for Black Lives Matter and move through the streets as Black trans folks, as Latinx non-binary folks, who have jobs today and are in college today. And it simply was not the case 15, 20 years ago in the same ways. You dishonor Pose, the impact of Pose and its impact on the country, right? It's just, so for me, there has to be a recognition that, you know, like we can change the whole industry, but Billy Billy Porter's book is coming out.
That's right.
Just about to come out, where he's talking about the journey to Pose, right? Journey to his iconic status today, and to not pretend like, well, we celebrating this gown I got on today. This ain't been how it's been, right? And so I think that's some of it.
And if it weren't Billy Porter, many places it's still dangerous, life-threatening.
That's right, exactly.
And it may still be for Billy to be that.
That's right, that's right.
And as I hear you, I know how many times white folks have done, well, look how far we've come. That's not what we're talking about, that. And using it as excuse resistance to more transformational change. It actually is a healing energy process of, as you said, celebrate, acknowledge, honor those who've been doing decades of work, what's happening now, to get the energy for the next layer of work that needs to be done.
Exactly. And I'm glad you said that, added that caveat, Kathy, because I am talking about honoring the labor of the people who've been in the fight. That's so I'm not talking about anybody trying to get a badge for, well, but we elected President Obama, and look at Oprah, and actually you didn't even vote for President Obama. So you didn't elect him, right? So not in the space where we're just trying to say what do you, because sometimes the how far we've come is what do you people want?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
you don't deserve any more. You're lucky we gave you that much.
What more can we do? Right. That's not fair that we still have to be talking about getting y'all 40 acres and a mule and all this stuff. So yeah.
We just have a few minutes left. We elected a Black president without acknowledging the white supremacist backlash that came with the next election and is still here, increasing in so many ways. So in the last couple moments, because my guess if folks are listening now or over the break, I think more folks are leaning in the not very hopeful side. And so what would you say to folks that are just needing to re-energize, know they're going to be in the fight, but are feeling pretty hopeless today?
So my son and his spouse and I had dinner with Sam and I a few weeks ago. We talked about 2022, what we're looking forward to. And Blair named joy, that I'm simply going to live into joy. And it's very, very powerful. And then invited us all into joy, right? And to talk about how we're not going to allow the circumstance to define our joy, right? And so that's stuck with me since last Sunday evening when we were together. And even as I sit back and I reflect on that, I recognize that that can be contextual, right? And so your joy does not necessarily look like my joy, and my having joy, so how we define joy, which is also
Racialized.
It's racialized, and as a framework is privileged. So there's this right, there's a privilege that comes being able to live into joy. It's hard to be in joy when you're hungry and you ain't got no food. So it's all of this stuff that's wrapped up in it. But what I'm also left with is what's the energy that I want to put in the world, and what's the energy that I want to take in, right? And there's enough out there, right, that would have me be despondent and down, but I choose joy. I choose joy and love as a way that I want to live, and as a way I want to be with and for others, right? So I choose that, right? And if that's what you choose, you have to actively live into that, right? You cannot let the external things that might take you away from living in that define that. It can impact it, but allowing it to define whether you have joy and peace and happiness and caring is a choice. It's a choice that you get to make. And so whatever you need to do, my grandson just left here, joy, right? He didn't want to leave. He wanted to play my iPad. And so I said to him, well, we're going to play Trouble when you come back next week, which lifted his spirit, right? I want to live into, want you to live into the joy, not into the disappointment that you got to leave right now. But I appreciate it. I get that. So I invite folks into caring for yourself and define it. What's your decision? What are you going to decide to live into? What's the space? And so if you want to decide to live into peace, you want to decide to live into joy, what are you going to decide to do?
As change agents and leaders for centuries have been doing. Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington, the Washington Consulting Group, I love you in my soul. Thank you so much for joining us again. I'm Kathy Obear. We're going to start looking at issues of class and classism with Dr. Becky Martinez starting in the next round, and can't wait to invite you back. All of you, deep rest, deep soul searching as you begin this new year. All the best to y'all. You've been listening to Dr. Kathy Obear on Transformation Talk Radio.
Thanks for tuning in, and be sure to catch us next time as Kathy inspires listeners to become agents of change, motivate, innovate, and speak truth to power. Step into the courageous you that will change the world. Connect to life-changing conversations to extend your reach. For more information on Kathy and her work, please visit drkathyobear.com. That's drkathyobear.com.